Unknown Thought is made possible through the generosity of sponsors who care about people. IC Savings Bank, Ready Honda, and Corey's Clothiers. I'm here today with Malcolm Lester, a illustrious Canadian publisher, I would say philosopher, and all-around fascinating man. Malcolm, in the early 90s, you published a book called I've Lived Here Since the World Began. It was an illustrated history of Native peoples of Canada. Ever since I've been young, I've been fascinated with Native culture in Canada, and actually it had two streams to it. The first stream was just a general fascination with self-sufficient societies. I love the way that they figured it out, and in one of my grade 6 projects, I actually made a film of me making some native object, which I took, some mortar and pestle, I don't remember exactly, and that was my first on-camera appearance where I filmed myself doing some native project. But as I grew, I came to appreciate the native value system in which they believed in the spirit and they believed in not taking from the earth more than they required and leaving as little trail as possible. So I've always been fascinated. I'm perpetually indignant and upset about the treatment of Native people in Canada. The Indigenous people in Canada, at least in my estimation, without good cause, are still being treated in a terrible fashion. By way of introduction, I want to get to a question for you about the Jewish people. Erwin Kotler has said that the Jews are an indigenous people and their homeland is Israel, where they've always lived, they've always prayed, they've always connected, it's always been their place, and clearly there's a challenge to that. Can we talk about what it means to be an indigenous people? And after, I'd like to talk about the Jewish people and indigenous existence with regards to the land of Israel. But I'm fascinated about your view of Native culture, given that you published that wonderful volume.
Well, I must say that that volume was part of a series of books we were doing on Canadian history. We had published very successfully a book called The Illustrated History of Canada, which was the work of 6 different historians looking back on Canadian history. And then we did a book called The Story of Canada, which was an illustrated history of Canada for young people. So I've Lived Here Since the World Began was the perspective on Canadian history, but from the natives' point of view. So it was part of that kind of little publishing tradition that we had established.
And how did you feel at that point publishing and recognizing that the Native people, at least as far as I can see, are not well treated?
Well, this is what I do as a publisher. I like to make public. To publish is to make public. I like to make public issues that I think are important, and obviously this is an important issue. And to take the perspective of Canadian history from the Native person's point of view, from the Aboriginal point of view, I thought was quite important. And
did you feel that it changed anything? Was there an impact? Was this a book that
well,
got people aware?
It was a selection of the Book of the Month Club, and that pleased me a great deal, and I think it did get people aware, and I believe it's still in print.
And will we see in our time or a true drive to creating a healthy relationship for Indigenous people in Canada and for us giving them the self-respect and the esteem that they deserve?
I like to think the answer is yes.
I hope so too. And I want to now focus the same concept on Israel, the indigenous concept. So are the Jewish people indigenous to the land of Israel? Is that really a true way of seeing this relationship? And there are some who would argue absolutely, it's impossible to see it any other way. But what creates indigenous?
I think it's both a connection to the land itself. We all came from Israel. And there was just an interesting article in the New York Times, for example, last week that showed the genetic similarities between Ashkenazi Jews and Sephardic Jews. There is a suggestion on the part of Israel bashers that somehow Jews don't have any claim to the land of Israel, that historically Ashkenazim came from disparate groups of people, particularly the Khazars, which was this tribe that converted to Judaism, I think, in the 8th and the 9th century. But we also have a connection to Israel through the literature, through the Bible, which is our book of books.
So the idea that you're indigenous cannot simply be rooted in that's where I was born or that's where my grandfather was. You're talking about a spiritual connection that is part of a literary record, that is part of a seared in our consciousness idea, and therefore, regardless of our exile or diasporic perspective, we are inherently indigenous to the land, and it calls to people to come and find themselves back in the land. This is the Abrahamic concept. Go to the land and become the land.
That's well put.
Thank you. But have you been to Israel in the last little while and experienced a call of some sort?
I've only been to Israel once, but I was very moved by my experience because of the historicity of the land. The places of great Jewish piety, even of Christian piety and Muslim piety. It's almost overwhelming, that sense of history. And in Jerusalem itself, there's a kind of light that I would call Jerusalem light that bathes everything in a kind of, for want of a better term, spirituality.
Yeah, it's so hard to define spirituality, and so many people define it in so many different ways, but it could perhaps be said that when we talk about the spiritual connection, we're talking about an environment in which there is a striving for identity. Israel is a place where you go and identity can never be far away from you, but I'm concerned about a concept which I think we are free to discuss openly, which is, can Israeli society truly be democratic, or is it always doomed to be identocratic, where your identity is more important than democracy? I know you published a book by Patrick Watson and Benjamin Barber about the struggle for democracy. How would you see Israel's role? And we all acknowledge Israel's need to protect its democracy, and it maybe cannot be as free and open as it would like. But I think you're the man that has the experience with this struggle, and perhaps you could shed light on it for a younger person who's struggling with what Israel's role is in the world as the only democracy in the Middle East.
Well, I think being a Jew is to live with a lot of tensions in your life, and I think Israelis live within that tension of being a democratic state, yet having to defend themselves against an environment that's very hostile, against a group of countries that want to destroy Israel. But to be a Jew is to always live with tension, to live with paradox, and to try the best we can. And I don't think there has to be any shirking of democratic values to be a Jew or to protect the integrity of the land of Israel. I don't think that the two are necessarily in conflict.
So the extreme notion of democracy, where it's an absolutely open society, maybe when there's peace someday, Israel can find itself there. But would you suggest that Israel in many ways is actually probably almost a microcosm of the challenges that democracy faces?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think the challenge that Israel faces from a democratic perspective is a theocratic one. The ultra-Orthodox who want to set their standards as the way people should live. And I think that's wrong and inappropriate. I think democracy, again, evolves. Things that we thought were democratic have changed. I mean, in the 1940s, there was segregation in the United States. The United States fought Hitler's tyranny as a segregated country. And now we look back and think, how could we even accept that? And because our values have changed, because the laws have changed. So hopefully democracy is evolving into a situation that becomes freer and more liberal all the time.
Halavai, it would be so wonderful to see Israel at peace with itself, with its neighbors, and rebuilt speedily in our days. Malcolm, it's been an absolute delight to have conversation with you, and I look forward to whatever's next on your agenda, and I'm continually inspired by you, and thank you for being on.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you.